Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. I am Amani Jamal. I am the Dean of the school, and I'm so happy to see you here for our Dean's Leadership Series. A hallmark of Princeton SPIA is our ability to gather the world's brightest scholars and sharpest practitioners to help us make sense of the issues of the day. At this time of profound uncertainty and change in Washington, D.C., such analysis has never been needed more. The seismic shifts that are remaking the federal government with breathtaking speed are affecting all of us, but they have particular urgency for our alumni and our students, whose commitment to public service, especially at the federal level, is a core value of the school. We are fortunate to have with us today a perceptive observer to help unpack our shifting political landscape and momentous policy changes and discuss what it means for the future of U.S. governance. Molly Jong-Fast is an American writer, journalist, author, political commentator, and podcaster. She's the author of 2 novels, Normal Girl and The Social Climber's Handbook, and her memoir, How to Lose Your Mother, will be published in June. After the 2016 election, Molly began focusing her writing on politics. She became a regular contributor to The Forward, The Bulwark, Playboy, Glamour, and Vogue. In December 2019, she became an editor-at-large at the Daily Beast and began hosting the podcast, The New Abnormal. Molly joined Vanity Fair as a special correspondent in 2022 and began hosting the Fast Politics iHeartMedia podcast. And in January 2024, she joined MSNBC News as a political analyst. Over the years, she has amassed a large social media following thanks to her signature wit and keen insights. Thank you to Molly Jong-Fast for joining us today and to everyone in attendance. Thanks as well to Princeton SPIA, Julian Zelizer, the Malcolm Stevenson Forbes class of 1941, Professor of History and Public Affairs, for moderating. I'm very much looking forward to this stimulating discussion and learn more about the challenges and opportunities ahead of us. Please, thank you.
Yes, I don't know. Where do we stand?
You can sit right here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here, Molly. This is terrific. Let me ask, so the only thing less turbulent or more turbulent than universities right now is the media. So how do you decide? I wanted to talk a little bit about that before we talk about politics, but when you're on air discussing something, you're thinking of your podcast, given all the turbulence, how do you decide what to focus on and what should be left for another time?
Well, so I love, by the way, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for having me fancy Princeton. Very exciting, and just it's really a pleasure to get to be here. But also, you've never interviewed me.
That's
so
true.
You've come
That's
on
true.
my podcast, and I have interviewed you. And Julian has written 20, I've written, this will actually be my 4th book, but Julian has written 27 books.
Sure.
So it's a lot of books.
A lot of
right. So I have interviewed him 27 times. No, so how do we decide what to talk about on television? So you and I both do a lot of cable news, and so what tends to happen is you have sort of an expertise. So your expertise is sort of history, right? History of politics. And my expertise is sort of women, Democrats. Nobody ever wants to talk about women. By the way, it is so interesting to me. They overturned, when SB 8 happened, the Texas law overturning Roe, a year before Roe v. Wade was overturned. I thought, now people are going to start talking about women. Right now, they're going to start talking. No, they didn't. So, but yes, so those are sort of my expertise. So I try to talk about this stuff. I mean, because I have a podcast and because I write a column and because I do these videos, I talk to a lot of people. So it ends, I talk to a lot of members of Congress. I talk to a lot of senators. I talk to a lot of, so I end up knowing stuff that I can talk about, that's sort of reporting. It's things that have sort of come into my view. I mean, for example, today, Democrats had a hearing on the SNAP cuts, right? So that's something that might not get. So Republicans this reconciliation is going to ultimately end up cutting SNAP, which is this food assistance, and it will end up cutting probably Medicaid, I think, because the top line numbers are $880 billion over 10 years from Medicaid. So, and they want to cut SNAP too. So there was a hearing today, Democrats had a hearing about SNAP. I wanted to talk about that on television because that's something that might not get the kind of, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be talked about on television. There are other things that will get clipped on Grabrion, which is the sort of bane of my existence, and end up on an RNC clip reel. So you just have to be careful.
And
Have you ever been Grabrion?
yes, I have.
Yeah.
So let me ask a different question on the podcast. So you have a great podcast. That's what everyone's talking about these days, are podcasts, how you do them, what makes them effective. In yours, which is from a liberal perspective,
Right.
a left perspective, how have you put that together, and how has it become such a good podcast? What do you think constitutes its strength?
So I would say that I'm not so lefty, honestly. I would say that there's a part of the left that doesn't get a lot of coverage, that's sort of very far left, and that it gets pretty pejorative coverage, even from left-leaning outlets. So I do think, I mean, we see this I mean, if you just, I think of myself as, I'm left-ish, but mostly I'm like largely anti-Trump, right? I want normal democracy to continue. And I don't totally have like, I'm really careful to try to stay out of primary contests. I'll interview people I mean, for example, how you learn to do a podcast is you learn what works and doesn't work. So a great example is a couple years ago, we interviewed every mayoral candidate. Nobody cares. It was literally the New York City mayoral candidates. Nobody wanted to see it. I didn't want to do it. It was just soul crushing. And in the end, it didn't even matter because no one knew how ranked choice voting worked anyway. So, but I try to stay out of primary contests because I think ultimately, but right now, this is a really interesting time because we have real assaults on norms and institutions. So it's easy to have a mandate because it's very clear that the sort of what normal democracy should look like and what Trump is trying to push.
And how do you deal with that ongoing tension? How do you talk and cover abnormal politics, truly abnormal politics, versus the pressure many people feel, and you see it all the time, you hear it all the time, to cover it as if this was just another Republican administration? How do you deal with that tension?
Well, I think that I want to talk about the group chat, the Houthi PM small group chat.
Jeffrey Goldberg.
Right, Jeffrey Goldberg. Not all of us can get added into a Signal chat, but if you can, you should stay. No, I think it's a great example of what we saw in Trump 1.0 was this sort of crushing. That was this sort of, they tried to crush norms and institutions, but there was so much resistance that they weren't able to do it. What we've seen in Trump 2.0 is a sense, like, I think a lot of these people think they can manipulate Trump into getting what they want, right? We saw this with the billionaires. They made donations because they thought they could get Trump to do what they wanted. Now, all we have is the first Trump administration to look at. I mean, you're a historian, right? Isn't the best prediction what just happened? So if you look at the first Trump administration, that never worked, right? The times when people tried to get him to tried to manipulate him into stuff, that stuff never worked. So the question is, will it work this time? And I just don't think that what never worked is going to work this time.
You're kind of an optimist, though. I mean, you've been an optimist.
Yes,
and
that's
still-
one of my,
So even with the speed and velocity of what's happening, you still hold and think at some level that ultimately there'll be limits to what the administration can do.
well, that's a big, that's why none of us are sleeping so well, is the question is, right, are there limits to what they can do? And that's an open question right now, I think. I think the more that stuff like the Houthi group chat happens, the better. Because we're reminded that these people are not, so much of what's happened in the last 2 months is people policing themselves, people obeying in advance, people giving up because they don't want to have problems. That is a real thing. And that does not need to happen, right? Trump 1.0, maybe there were more guardrails, but really, resistance resists. And the American people, and by the way, this is, and I wrote about it today in my column in Vanity Fair, that what Democrats are doing in leadership is actually quite stupid because the base is not happy, right? Like in Colorado, Bernie and AOC were expecting, a couple thousand people. They got 30,000 people. So that is, if you're 30,000 people, people don't turn out for stuff like that unless they're mad, unless something's going really wrong. I mean, a good example is my dad, who is great and who went to Princeton, and is very smart. And, he texted me yesterday to say he was going to a protest. If normal people are going to protests, that's a sign that things are not normal, right? My dad is not a professional protester. He's a 70-year-old guy. So the question is, if that's happening, then what does that mean? And if that's happening while Chuck Schumer is saying, well, it may be a constitutional crisis, we don't know, we have to get more information, you've got a base of the party and a leadership that are not in line. And so what you set yourself up for, and I think this is coming, is the Democratic Tea Party, right? Where you don't have, where people lose primaries. I mean, there's no law that says that these people need to stay in power.
Mm-hmm. How do you think of the problem? So sticking on the leadership, it seems the hard part is this, and I think leaders of all institutions feel this, whether it's media, universities, law firms, they're all wrestling with this, or the Senate. You're not dealing with a person in the president who's a rational actor as we traditionally think of it.
Right.
So with the shutdown, the dilemma was, do you use leverage? Do you try to? But what happens if the other side doesn't really care if the government remains shut down? What if the other side doesn't matter if there's protests, doesn't care? How do you think of how Democrats or opponents more broadly should deal with that element of this administration?
So this was the Schumer dilemma, right? Chuck Schumer said, should we let them shut down the government? Supposedly, I talked to his office. They told me that what Trump World told them was that Russ Vought was ready, willing, and excited for a shutdown. Russ Vought is the head of OMB. He is an architect of Project 2025. You'll remember Project 2025 as the thing that polled terribly before Trump said he wasn't going to do it, right? So Russ Vought had said, shut down the government, go for it. We're excited. We plan to deputize as essential workers every HR boss in the federal government and fire everyone. So we will keep this government open and just continue to fire people. Now, my question is maybe, but think about Mitch McConnell. If Mitch McConnell had that job, would Mitch McConnell be scared? I don't think Mitch McConnell would be scared. And that, I think, is the big question, is Harry Reid, if Harry Reid had that job, I don't know. So I think the question is, and also even more than that, if Schumer needed to say, this is what I think, okay? Schumer needed to say, either we're not going to make a deal and we're going to fight, and which is what he first said, and then he needed to stay consistent and have consistent questions of what he was going to get. So what did he want? He could have said, I want guaranteed that you're not going to cut, that you're going to cut $440 billion and not 880. But, ask for guarantees. Now, what I would say is that by the time it got to the Senate, it was too late, right? That CR should have died in the House. And that is what, by the way, everybody thought would happen, because Mike Johnson is historically, at least since he's been Speaker, quite bad at math. He almost never can get the numbers he needs. But what Democrats did not understand was that Mike Johnson was not whipping those votes by himself, right? He was whipping those votes with Donald Trump and Elon Musk. So the message was, if you don't vote for this bill, we're going to primary you. And these are members of Congress who are probably pretty craven. I mean that in a nice way. No, I don't. And they're pretty craven. And so they were like, okay. And he got every vote except Thomas Massey.
Yeah.
So once it got out of the House, the shutdown was going to end up being on Democrats. And that's why Schumer had big problems.
Can I ask, Ma, you're very direct. We know each other and you say what's on your mind, which I think is a great virtue. A lot of people now are leaders of these institutions. It's not simply bargaining. They're scared to defend themselves.
Yeah.
So our president published an op-ed in The Atlantic, which was excellent, defending the university.
Yeah.
And it was notable. It shouldn't have been notable. He just kind of outlined why universities are so important. The media's doing this a lot. Why are people scared? Not necessarily to do a give and take with Trump on some issue, but just broadly defend the institutions that are under attack with clarity, with force, and with vigor. Why are people so scared to do that?
So I have a couple of theories on this. And one of them is just from my own life. My grandfather was Howard Fast. He was a communist. He was jailed. He was the only recipient of the Stalin Peace Prize. Not our best. He went a little far with it. You never want to get a peace prize from Stalin. That's how I live my life. That said, but my grandfather was jailed by this country for refusing to name the names of the people involved in a fundraising for it was an orphanage for Spanish children orphaned in the Spanish Civil War. Now, who knows, because my grandfather was actually a communist, but he was jailed for refusing to name names, held in contempt of Congress. They went down to Washington. The story is just amazing. They went down to Washington, D.C. on the train. They put him in jail for 3 months. I get a lot of strength from that because I knew my grandfather, and he was a pretty interesting guy, but he was not such a tough guy. And so I get a lot of strength from the fact that that your country can persecute you and you can survive. Like, I get a lot of strength from that. I don't know why. I just feel like I'm as brave as that guy is, and he wasn't so brave. So that's just from my own experience. I think there are two things why people are so hesitant to protect their institutions. Part of it is that I think that group of billionaires did no one any favors, right? Because they immediately were like, let's make a deal. We have, astronauts. We want to send stuff into space. I mean, Bezos, that was pretty obvious. Bezos, no friend of Trump's, right? He just wants to send stuff into space. He doesn't want Elon to get sort of all the marbles. And Facebook, these guys just went along with it because they thought it would help them. And then I think there was a feeling, well, maybe you can manipulate him. And we saw this with these European leaders who all went to meet with Trump, and one after another were like, you're so great, Mr. Trump. And then Trump was like, I love England. Maybe I'll join the Commonwealth. I mean, completely crazy stuff. So I think they feel like if you suck up to him, it works, and if you stay out of his peer review, he'll forget about you. But what you don't see, and I think the Columbia story is so instructive. First of all, the Doge cuts. I mean, what's great about the Doge cuts, and very little is great about the Doge cuts, is that they're not saving any money. So already, and they're just continually being reversed by the courts, right? Just like with Trump 1.0. So they're going to have to rehire all these people. They'll kick it up to the Supreme Court. There's not a critical mass of partisan hackery on the Supreme Court. There isn't. So Alito and Thomas may be practically Fox News hosts, and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh will go along with anything, but you're not going to get Coney Barrett and you're not going to get Roberts. So you don't have the numbers to just rubber stamp all the crazy. And I think that is a real reason to feel good if there's one bit of good news. And in fact, yesterday, they didn't take Sullivan v. New York Times. They didn't take it. They could have taken it. That's what Trump wanted. That was the Steve Wynn mega donor case set up to overturn libel laws, and they didn't take it. So there are reasons to feel good. There are reasons to protect your institutions. And the biggest of which is that history will look back at you as a coward. I'm sorry, but I did not come this far to be a coward. And I know people who have left this country, and I know people who no longer go on television because they're scared. And honestly, I think it's because we have not had to be brave in modern life. We have phones and we have Starbucks and we have, we don't have to kill bears, but we have to be brave. Today we have to be brave, and bravery is contagious. And I am proud to be brave. And if I need to be persecuted by the dumbest administration ever, then bring it on.
Yeah, I mean, you can see with you can see with the federal judges right now who are, I think, acting with that bravery, and they're enduring intimidation, threats, not only to themselves, but to their family, to their children. But they have great clarity on their role and the importance of preserving the law. And so they are, I think, embodiments of what you're talking about.
There are judges, the one thing I would say is, when you read the news, there's a bias towards the negative a little bit. So while some law firms bent the knee, many did not, right? Well, there have been people who have stood up, and the federal judges are a great example. Justice Amy, I know, not the liberal folk hero we were looking for, but stood up to Trump. There are people who are standing up to Trump, and the more they do it, the more, like Trump 1.0, we saw, if you resist, he's not able to do stuff.
And by the way, I'll go a little longer, and then we'll have Q&A from whoever wants. You talked about your grandfather. Do you think we're in a comparable era? And I realize I'm the historian, but I'm curious, you have family history, in a comparable era of McCarthyism right now, or is this less dangerous, more dangerous? I mean, what do you think?
So I talked to Clay Risen.
There's a great book on McCarthyism out right now.
I interviewed him. He has a great book on McCarthyism. He writes for the New York Times, very smart. And we were talking about, what does this look? Is it work? Actually, this is like the best parlor game ever. So what historical period is this most like? I think it's the most like McCarthy in modern life. And what is it better or worse than McCarthy? Okay, because this is really, by the way, how could we even know, right? But is it better or worse than McCarthy? And I think it's actually a little better. And I'll tell you why. Because during McCarthy, we had a much more fulsome media. We had many more outlets. We had newspapers. We had local newspapers. We had, New York City had 5 newspapers or something. But we had much higher publication standards, right? You couldn't necessarily, you had standards on TV things couldn't get on television, things couldn't get on the radio, things couldn't get, now we're in a time where okay, so here's a good example. Say I get arrested. Say I'm sitting here and they come in and they arrest me. Every single person here has a phone, right? Say the FBI comes in, say, even better, say Homeland Security, right? Whatever. They come in like with the kid Kahil from the grad student, right? Say they come in, they arrested him. People they were wearing like plain clothes. And there's a video. That video is everywhere. I've seen that video 10 times, right? There is no question that he got arrested from ICE, right? There is no, we saw it with our own eyes. We would not have that kind of clarity back during McCarthy. The other reason why I actually think this is a little better than McCarthy is because they don't have the moral high ground here, right? They don't. I mean, this is just a whole thing where they really don't like immigrants, right? I mean, there's no moral high ground here. What's the case? And so I do think most people, with McCarthy, there was a sense that maybe communism was going to come and take over America, that it was so powerful. But who is the villain here, right? What is the villain? There's no narrative. So as much as Trumpism, they do control a lot of the media, or not the media, but they control the technology, the algorithm to get this content, and you see a lot more conservative content. But I don't think they really have a narrative.
Do you think, do you have back to the media? So we'll end on a few questions on that. I mean, do you worry, not about the media capitulating or parts of the media capitulating, but are people listening? And, the great thing about being a professor is I can do all the media and I don't know the answer. I see the students, I can engage with the students, and it's very real.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that more existential? Like, are we in a period you can say all this, we can talk about it, and it kind of floats away and a lot of people just aren't really paying attention?
Well, so that I actually wrote about. I wrote about all of this all the time, endlessly. Do I think that people aren't paying attention? I think
you worry about it.
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, 30,000 people in Denver came out, so they're paying attention now. And I think, look, the good news and the bad news are the same, right? Which is Trump is about to mess with institutions in a way we haven't seen in modern life. So when people don't get their Social Security checks, are they going to notice? I think they are. Do we want that to happen? Absolutely not. I mean, that's one of the things that I saw in the 2024 election cycle was that you would say to people, Project 2025, which Trump has outlined, says that Trump is going to do this, this, and this. And people would say, but he didn't do that last time. Because he didn't do it last time, because there was all this resistance last time. And that is, I think, fundamentally part of the reason why this time he's been able to do so much is there's been a certain suspension of disbelief where people have said, last time it was okay, so this time it will be okay. And you would hear that all the time from voters, right? That last time was okay, so this time will be okay. And I think it's really important to remember that there is, that has served him.
And then finally, how do you think, to wrap this part of the conversation up, opponents of the administration, and doesn't have to be progressive or liberal, people who are upset with that, everything you've described, what are the best ways to communicate in this media environment, in this attention-getting environment where the president's very good at getting attention? What should his opponents do to make sure these messages, the stories of the real-world impact, get out? What's your opinion on that?
So I want to read a tweet. It's not a tweet, it's a truth. Okay, I'm going to read a truth. It's not a truth. It's a skeet. Okay, I'm going to read a skeet.
I don't even know what that is.
It's from Blue Sky. I'm going to read a skeet for you from the director. She is the chief of staff and speechwriter for Governor Pritzker. Okay. The fight going on, Governor Pritzker from Illinois. The fight going on in the Democratic Party right now is not between hard left, and moderate. It's between those who want to fight and those who want to cave. And team fight stretches across all ideological aspects of the party. Misread this at your own peril. And that's what I would say. I think there's a big team fight, and I think there are some people who are team cave. And if you want to protect norms and institutions, which are fundamental for keeping our democratic situation going, then you have to be team fight.
One last question. If you have are there mics? You can come line up, and let me just ask this final question. Do you think the news media is up for the fight? Are they up for the next few years where they don't have to be anti-Trump, but they certainly have to report on exactly what's happening? Are they ready for it?
No.
So that you're not optimistic.
No, I'm not. So, I mean, I would say this. There are news, like the New York Times has an incredible team of investigative reporters, and they will do some really important stuff. ProPublica, there are some places, but none of us are ready for this, right? We have no precedent for what an unchecked autocrat looks like. I mean, we don't know whether, I talk to people who are very ensconced in this business, and they don't know whether to freak out or how freaked out to be. I mean, there's, when you're dealing with unprecedented stuff, there's no precedent.
Okay, first question over there. She went. Do you have a question? Oh, you're handing out. Oh, I'm sorry. Right here. Here. Okay, sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Hi. My question is, do you think that this immigration narrative that you're talking about, or whatever else they've been throwing against the wall, could eventually get as potent as the communist narrative in the post-war era, or do you think they're less sustainable?
So the thing that I think is important to remember about the Cold War, not the Cold War, about the communist narrative is that it came after World War II. And again, like, I'm going to pull back and talk about the Alien Enemies Act, which is this. So part of this Trump administration thing is that they have found these zombie laws that are still on the books, laws that everyone had forgotten about because they're so stupid. And they're things like Comstock, right, which was for you not being, you can't mail things that pornographic, but it's really meant to be things that would compromise women's sensitive, right, that they would be compromised by seeing things that were upsetting. And part of the Comstock Act prevented the mailing of medical equipment. I mean, this is an 18th century law. And so the problem with the Alien Enemies Act, which is another law that dates back to that period, is that it has been invoked 3 times, right? World War I, War of 1812, World War I, World War II. So this is a law that was set up for when you were at war. If you had some people, you could sort of jail them. And I think it's important to remember that this is a product of a wartime mentality. So you have the narrative of the Red Scare was from a wartime mentality, right? World War II, Russia, Cold War. It was sort of that period. And I don't see a way in which, like, I think about after 9/11 a lot, because and we were just talking about this, after 9/11, Bush had a kind of pass to do a lot of stuff. And that's when we saw things like the Patriot Act pass. There was a certain, like, well, we're at war, so we can't, and people criticized Bush after 9/11, got in big trouble. And there was just, he got a huge bump. And that was because of something that he shifted it into a narrative, but before that it was not. And I don't think there's something organic like that. You'll remember Trump has tried a lot of different villains. And in Trump 1.0, there was the Muslim ban, right? Remember that? And so I do think, now he's mad at Mexico and Canada and maybe Greenland. I'm not sure, like, what you see with conservative messaging is they're so good sometimes, but they have to workshop stuff a lot. And what you saw from the group chat situation, when they haven't workshopped it a lot, they're all over the place. And that's what we're seeing with this. Like, it's fake, it didn't happen, Jeff Goldberg is bad. I mean, all different answers. So unless things really fall their way, I think they're gonna have trouble with selling this, you know?
Questions back there, Julia?
Hi, I really resonated with what you said about team fight and how that, crosses all ideological sects of the party. But I'm still curious, kind of, what do you think is the ideological future for the Democratic Party? We see 30,000 people come out for Bernie, and yet so many Dems say we have to move to the center if we're going to reach
Right.
Trump's America.
So, I mean, look, this is a way in which I think the mainstream media has failed. The mainstream media really has a kind of, they don't love leftism. I think there's a lot of anxiety around leftism. In 2016, Bernie was a populist, and he really rode a populist wave, right? What were his issues? Healthcare, I mean, I have heard so many Bernie speeches about glasses, free glasses, like, free dental care. I mean, really, but that is a populist thing that is popular. And Donald Trump ran on populism. Somehow he was able to make tax cuts for very rich people a populist win. So the question is, and I think like when you saw with Biden in Biden's administration, he did a lot of very populist legislation, right? And I was told by many smart Democrats, when I said none of this is breaking through, they would say, well, politics is downstream of policy. And so good policy will be good politics. Well, obviously that doesn't work now. So, right, there was good policy, but nobody knew. So if policy happens and nobody knows, what are we even doing? And so I think there will be progressive policy. I mean, that we saw it worked, right? The Inflation Reduction Act actually gave us a Goldilocks economy. So it did work. So I think we'll see more of that. How it messages is going to be the real question. I don't know that I think the question will be, who is the person who is a once in a lifetime if you think about Obama wasn't so lefty, but he managed to ignite the left, right? He managed to get a broad swath of the electorate behind him. So I think that when it comes to Democrats, the problem is so much more politics than policy.
I mean, the thing about Sanders is whatever one thinks of his policy, he has incredible clarity and consistency of message. If you watch him enough, it is the same thing, but he has a point of view. He says the point of view, and he says it in a way anyone can understand.
Right.
And I do think that's a challenge. And that is, he himself has said that's something President Trump does well.
Yes.
And he did well in the campaign. And I do think it's part of the challenge for Democrats.
And if you think about like the sort of smartest part of MAGA, which is a little bit of an oxymoron, but the sort of brains behind MAGA is really Steve Bannon, right? And Steve Bannon understands the populism and the power of Bernie and AOC. And I think some of the mistake of 2024 was Democrats get so stuck in the consultant class and sort of, workshopping and McKinseying their message that they kind of lose the connection to voters.
Questions? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. There's a lot of talk about the, changing media landscape and fragmentation and its impact on political polarization. I was wondering if you think the podcast world is actually just making this a lot worse, and how we get people to agree on anything when they're sort of just living in totally different realities based on the information they consume.
Okay, so it's many different questions. I'll start with podcasts. So what I think is that you can't, it's the case for Harris to go on Joe Rogan. Okay, we'll start with that. Joe Rogan has this very popular podcast. Is Joe Rogan is he a person that I want to have dinner with? Maybe not. But is he a person who has the ear of millions of people? Absolutely. So should Democrats go to spaces where Republican voters are? This is a Bernieism, right? You go on Fox News. Now, the truth is, Joe Rogan has 10 million times the viewers of Fox. I mean, he has, Joe Rogan has 50, 60, 70 million listeners. I mean, even just parts of his podcast. Fox News has 5 million, right? So there's a real difference here. Do I think that, for example, Gavin Newsom started a podcast. One of the problems with Gavin Newsom's podcast is that what he should have done is gone on Charlie Kirk's podcast. What he shouldn't have done was bring Charlie Kirk to his podcast, right? That doesn't make any sense. And you don't need to platform Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk needs to platform you. And that's the question. Like, you have to go where these viewers and voters are and show them that Democrats want to do stuff for them. I mean, that's that idea that if you don't go there, you don't exist to them. As for like a truth, like an agreed upon truth, that is a real problem. And my theory of the case is that local news would help that a lot. That the more you can do, that the more there can just be straight reporting out of local news. There's a firehouse being built in my town. Here's a newspaper story about it, where you can see that news can just be functional and can be completely nonpartisan. That is the most hopeful. And so even though I come from the opinion side, I generally think that the sort of best thing is the kind of ProPublica model and the kind of just straight reporting that is just, this is what is happening, and again, there's bias there too, right? What are you covering? What are you not covering? But at least there's a certain sort of framework for just exactly what's happening.
There's a guy, by the way, David Plotz. I think he's on the Political Gab Fest.
Yeah.
And he runs this organization, and I'm forgetting the name. CityCast. And it's basically, they fund local podcasters who are doing local stories, whole network of them. And then he puts it on kind of a national platform. But they have both the money and the platform. It's very interesting kind of project that doesn't try to replicate old local newspapers, but is doing it in this new medium. So something to look at. Question.
Yeah, kind of going off the idea of political polarization and segmentation, I think something that I've talked to my friends about a lot is what's going on with Gen Z men, and how do you reach that demographic? Because to your point, no matter what's going on in cable news, I don't know any 20-something who even has cable news. They're getting all of their news from Joe Rogan, podcasts, social media. So how does that get fixed? And how does specifically this manosphere culture that has fueled Elon Musk and fuels these narratives around immigration, all this, how do we crack that egg? Because that feels very stressful to me.
So I would say people under 40 don't have cable boxes because they're expensive. And why would you when you have streaming? Again, that's that they're online, right? People are getting their news from online. So a few things. One, I actually interviewed a guy called John Della Volpe, who's at the Kennedy School, and does a lot of polling for Gen Z men, Gen Z women and men. And two things are his theory of the case is that COVID, they lost trust in institutions after COVID lockdowns. And now I think part of it was this messaging that the right was able to really go into about COVID lockdowns. Part of it was they locked down, they made mistakes, as one does during a once in a lifetime pandemic. And I think that there was a real backlash there. But part of what happened was Trump offered them something, right? He offered them sneakers. He went on their shows. He was there. He played video games. He had conversations. They knew him. And I think that cannot be understated, right? Like Harris was not there. They did not know her. She did not make the effort. I mean, she made a lot of effort, but she did not get where they were. So they never sort of understood her or got her. So I would say that is the case. But I also think a lot of the really craven stuff Trump did worked, right? The sneakers, the Bitcoin. He kind of he did a lot of, he went to where his viewers were. And I think that's the message that I got so clearly from this 2024 cycle was you have to go where your people are. And by the way, most of them don't have cable.
How do you deal with the part of it? I mean, so all of that is definitely true, but there's part, and I'm thinking of you now, because there is part that is a continued backlash or response to your mother, meaning to the feminist revolution of the 1970s. I still think there's an element, certainly of the politicians, we're still in that, they're fighting that fight still. So how, for the younger generation that you're talking about, how do you deal with that part of that?
So I have a theory about that too. Sorry to tell you, I have a lot of theories. So I actually think that there have been like a ton of these mini backlashes. So you saw Trump got elected, and then you saw Me Too right after that. And then you keep having these kind of backlashes. So now you have this Gen Z is into this toxic masculinity. Like there's just a sort of backlash to backlash to backlash. And I think, and if you read Susan Faludi's Backlash, which is a really great book, and if you read it now, it does really still hold up to the ideas. It's great. And to a lot of these ideas that there's just, progress is never a straight line. There's always going to be backsliding. But, I think about my mom who really did not think, like they thought they didn't even need the ERA, right? They thought they didn't need the ERA. By the way, the fact that the ERA has become like a punchline, and that Biden, as he was leaving, he was like, I'm going to read this into the, they didn't read it into the record, but he was like, it's the law now. And everyone was like, LOL. Gets me so upset. But I mean, we've come from the 60s, we've come very far. That said, in 1973, we had Roe v. Wade. Today, we don't.
Right here in the middle.
Well, I blame Joe Biden for this. I voted for him, but the fact that he did not get out of the way when he said he would brought us to this place.
So who should we blame for this? I think there's a lot of blame to go around.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think there's a lot of blame to go around. And we can certainly blame Biden for this. I think we can blame a Democratic establishment that didn't push him hard enough to, when it looked like he was, he had said he was going to be a transitional candidate, and then he decided to stay in. I think that voters were angry about that. I think it didn't happen soon enough. I think there should have been a primary process. But there's a lot of blame to go around. Look, we could blame Merrick Garland, right? I'm happy to blame Merrick Garland. We can blame, there's a lot, we could blame, our Ruth Bader Ginsburg probably should have left the court and let Obama put someone else in there. I mean, there's, but history, I mean, I don't know. We can blame, there's a lot to blame. And I'm certainly not happy about that ERA. So.
I have a question about the women's vote this election. Excuse me. I know that I silenced it. Anyway, after Roe was overturned, I was totally convinced that the American women, especially young women for whom this is a real issue, would just like rise up and make that their main issue, and that they would never vote for Trump or the Republicans, but they did. And I just like to know if you have any comment about what happened.
So I would say this, if the same people had turned out for Harris that had turned out for Biden, Harris would be president. So it isn't so much that Trump got more votes. He got about this, he sort of got maybe a little bit less even, but he got more votes than Harris. And I think some of that is historically, when you change a candidate 100 days before the election, it's really a Hail Mary at that point anyway, right? We saw people Googling, is Joe Biden on the ballot still? So there were a number of real insurmountables here. But I also think some states hadn't, you had states like Texas, for example, where they had overturned Roe a year before. We talked about this. And in Texas, there's much higher now maternal mortality. You have these horror stories coming out. You don't have that in every state yet. And you don't have the kind of narrative that you probably will in another 4 years. So I think it was just not enough people had been affected by the carnage, which is making doctors afraid to treat. And I think we're going to see more of that. And I think that's what had to happen. But we certainly saw people who were working with Harris, these women. I'm thinking about, there was a couple women in Texas who had these horrible stories of being sent home to bleed out, and Amanda Zarowski is the one I was thinking of, she went on tour with Harris. And the people who were affected by it, their lives were forever changed, and their family members, but it just wasn't enough people yet. And I think we will see more Roe voters, and look, Trump is worried about it, right? Like there are a lot of people in the Republican Party who are pushing for Comstock, which would make the mailing of mifepristone illegal. That would be the legal framework to do a lot of stuff with the mail. And he's not, at least not yet, getting excited about it, because I think he knows it's a political liability.
Thank you so much. You speak about getting closer, like on podcasts or wherever the people are. You mentioned that, and that resonated with me. I recently read that 75% of the population in the US is in towns that are less than 5,000.
Yeah.
And I come from a town like that, way in the Midwest, far away from everything. I happen to live in this liberal bubble here in this area, but it's another world. And it's like we almost have two countries in a way. Any thoughts for you how to get to a population where towns, I don't know, in my hometown, 15 or 16% of the population have a bachelor's degree. Half the town lives at poverty level or lower. Like, how do you get to that population?
Well, that's a real question. So the question was, much of the country lives in smaller towns, and how do you get to those people who are not, and some of them don't have advanced degrees, they're maybe not as, proficient at communicating. So I would say this. One of the things that's really going to be critical, that is already something that I think we're seeing Democrats do more, is Democrats need to run everywhere. They need to run in red states and run in red cities. There are a lot of places in this country where there are Democrats who are not running on anything, right? Where the blue line is empty. And there needs to be that. I mean, there's a really great organization called Run for Something, and that's Amanda Lippman. And Amanda Lippman talks all about how if you run somebody in every election, you help the top of the ticket, but B, you also get you get voters engaged and you get them to understand. I mean, part of this is that you have places where people don't see the Democrats, so they don't know who they are or what they do. I mean, just like Harris not being on some of these media outlets, it's the same thing, Democrats not running in these Republican areas, right? There's no model. They don't see it, so they don't know it exists. And again, this even goes back to this idea of local news, right? If you have reporting that you can see is true, then you get to understand that this is actually a service, that this is actually a function and not a kind of propaganda.
And before we close up, can you just tell everyone about this terrific book you have coming out, what it's about?
So I wrote a book, it's funny because it's like the thing I want doesn't exist anymore because we're now in a new world. But Joan Didion wrote really great books about the sort of terrible times in her life. And I wrote a book that's about this terrible year of my life. And it's called How to Lose Your Mom. And it's about what happens when everything goes wrong and you have to keep going anyway. So I'm reading at the library here in Princeton in June when it comes out.
So terrific. Well, can't wait for it. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks everyone for the great time.